Hello and welcome back to Salute Your Sports. It has been months. It's been a busy summer. Tom started a new job, of course, a little bit harder to make our schedules work. I went a couple trips overseas for myself. So it's been a while since the last show. I believe it was like right when the NBA finals were wrapping up. But for today's show, we'll start up with our full college football preview. We'll talk all about the college football. Obviously, we'll have NFL in the weeks to come. But we'll talk about the SEC and the Big Ten. A lot of new teams coming in. Texas, Oklahoma in the SEC, Oregon, USC in the Big Ten, among other teams. Where do those teams stack up? No Nick Saban and Bama. What does that mean for the Crimson Tide? Of course, our Heisman picks, our preseason Heisman picks. Actually, the first game just kicked off, Florida State and Georgia Tech this morning. We'll talk about our national champs, our 12-team field, which is crazy to think about. We got a 12-team field right now in the college football playoff, Tom. But I love it. I can't wait to get started. How have you been? And how are you doing today, Tom Casselman?
Doing fantastic. It has been a fantastic sports summer. I mean, we had the Olympics just a couple of weeks ago with
Fantastic stuff.
lots of drama and just amazing performances there. And from all the people you would expect, Simone Biles, Katie Ledecky. I mean, of course, swimming, track and field. There,
Steph
U.S. was
Curry.
and all of those. Steph Curry, of course, with basketball. Good nights. Making sure that the gold stays in the U.S. of A. But now we start with probably the most kind of tumultuous, in a good way, on the field tumultuous college football season that we have perhaps seen in our entire lifetimes. And I know that's hyperbolic,
Wow.
getting in the statement of
Wow.
the week at the beginning of the show, in a manner of speaking, but it is so huge because of all of the conference realignment that we've seen. Typically in years past, as our watchers know, we go conference by conference, but really we're going to be focusing on two this year because that's where a majority of the big football programs are residing. With, like you said, teams that are basically the Pac-12 is no more. A couple big schools moving to the Big Ten, and of course the SEC. We've known about this a little bit longer. Oklahoma and Texas moving in there, and so let's start with the SEC. That really is, the big conference and the biggest news that we've had. Like I said, a couple years to kind of digest a little bit. It's finally happened. We've got Texas and Oklahoma joining what I think a lot of folks would consider is, has been the premier football conference. I know the
Yes.
Big Ten has always been, kind of like a more depth-filled conference. But when we're talking about the best of the best, it has been the SEC. Now, granted, Michigan did win the title last year, but historically
It's been
speaking,
almost all SEC.
it's
I actually
been
think
a
the SEC has
majority.
more depth as well, in my opinion, Tom. But that's a whole
Now,
nother debate in
yes.
itself.
Yeah, like
I
now,
think even
yes, but
before that. But
yeah,
anyway, the best
debatable, yes. So,
conference, the
so
SEC.
really, I mean, we're looking at a couple of teams. I mean, it's the preseason top 25. We're going to go based off the AP poll. That's the standard preseason. It's the standard throughout the season until we get the college football playoff rankings. And looking at where these two schools are, we've got Texas coming in at fourth. Not really a big surprise given that they were in last year's four-team college football playoff. Now it's going to 12. And then we've got Oklahoma sitting at 16, so currently just outside, kind of like that cutoff for the at-large field type of thing. So, Kamen, not sure where you want to start with this one. Do you want to go with Texas, a team that's probably more prominent, a team that's returning a well-known quarterback in Quinn Ewers, or do you want to start with Oklahoma and kind of assessing how do these teams currently fit in?
I was kind of just going to go by both of them, just kind of in a little hodgepodge. Just wanted to kind of look at the rankings of where they're at. I mean, Texas is ranked fourth in both polls, actually. Only Georgia is ahead of them in the SEC. Oklahoma, meanwhile, was 16th, which is crazy how good the SEC is and how, highly the SEC is getting predicted because Oklahoma is predicted, ranked 16th in the country right now. Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, Missouri, LSU, and Tennessee are ahead of them. So they're actually eighth out of 16 in the SEC, but 16th in the country. That speaks to the talent in the SEC conference, of course. But I mean, I'm looking at the teams ahead of them. Georgia, the quarterback is back. Texas, Quinn Ewers, you mentioned, is back. Jalen Milroe back from Bama. Georgia was Carson Beck. Ole Miss, Dart, Missouri with Carson Beck. I mean, these are all guys that are, if you look at the Heisman race, they're all somewhere in that top 10 range. So Oklahoma, meanwhile, was losing its quarterback in Dylan Gabriel to Oregon. So I kind of look at like the preseason rankings. It's like you said, Texas was in the college football semis last year, college football playoff. Oklahoma, I think they're about where they both should be for this season. I kind of wanted to look at this question just as a what is it? I always mix these up, micro and macro, but more of like a
Mhm.
all around, like, where do we see these teams in 5 years? The classic, like, job interview question. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Hmm.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Type deal. And I think Texas and Oklahoma are going to be really good in the SEC. I look at Georgia and Bama are kind of 1-2 for me. I know we'll talk about Bama post Nick Saban. I think it'll be impossible to achieve what they did with Nick Saban, but I think Bama's Bama. I love Kellen DeBoer as the coach. I think they're going to be really, really good for a while as well. So I kind of put Georgia as like the 1, Bama is the 2. Then I think Texas and Oklahoma are probably in that like next mix, with the programs like LSU, Florida, the next best. They're going to be in that 3 to 5 range in the SEC. I mean, I know the SEC is the top conference, but
Mhm.
you look at some of these teams that have moved to the SEC in the past. Our alma mater, Mizzou, right off the bat, played in the SEC East or SEC Conference Championship in their second year. A&M has been, mostly all right in the conference, by no means top dog, but they've been, middle of the pack doing decent. I love Mizzou, of course. Love the alma mater. Texas A&M, tons of respect for the, program. But, those two teams were a little bit above average in the Big 12. And I would say they're a little bit, right around average. I know Mizzou right now is really, really trending, hoping they're going to be really good for a while. But if you look at where they've been the last 10 years, Mizzou and A&M, about the middle of the pack. I look at Oklahoma and Texas as the programs they are, as the blue bloods they are. I don't see how they wouldn't be a little bit better than those two teams. So I look at that like 3 to 5 range. I know
Mhm.
with the NIL, maybe the program name doesn't mean as much as it used to back in the day. Because, you can get money anywhere, you can get exposure anywhere on social media and everything. But I look at Texas and Oklahoma as that like next pack, the LSU pack behind obviously the top dogs that we know of, Georgia and Bama.
Yeah, for me, I'm of kind of like two minds. I think that Texas obviously has already proven that they can play with the SEC.
They
Looking
beat
at their
Bama.
past two performances, I mean, yeah, they beat Bama last year, 2 years ago, only losing by 3, and I believe that game was in Alabama, so that was a road game for Texas. So a
I
really,
think it was a
really impressive
neutral
showing.
field game.
Was it neutral on that
It
one? Okay, it
was
might have been that
neutral.
like Alabama was home in that case
Yeah.
for that one, but I mean, yeah, Texas has shown. I mean, they've competed against SEC teams to this point. Of course, making it to the college football playoff is huge. Oklahoma is a team where I think on name brand, they're 16th to start out the year. I don't know if they necessarily rise much higher than that. I think that historically speaking, when they're not having these amazing offenses with Stoops as the coach, or much more recently Lincoln Riley, they're a team that's done pretty well in the Big 12, where it's a conference, that conference in particular is a lot more of offense and is historically known for not being very good with defense. You have to be balanced. You have to do both in the SEC. And not to say that Oklahoma can't do that, but this is absolutely going to be a step up in the week to week competition for that
Sure.
program. So when I'm looking at this, I mean, we are, like I said, we already know Quinn Ewers returning as the quarterback for Texas. Even when he goes pro, if we're going to like project a couple years out, you've got Arch Manning there. So Texas is a program that I think is going to be good this year in the SEC, and then is going to have the talent to continue to go forward. I mean, they just keep reloading at running back too, going from like a Bijan Robinson to a Jonathan Brooks. I think that they recruit really, really well, of course, because it's Texas. And now they've shown that they're guess you could kind of sort of say Texas is back from like those Vince Young days. I mean, obviously, it'd be nice if that culminated with a national championship type of thing. But
They're
there's
back to
certainly
being
more
a
back
top
than
like
they've
five
been.
program.
Exactly, yeah, and I think that they have merited that. Like I said, Oklahoma, there's a lot of flux in the SEC right now. Of course, I mean Nick Saban retiring is of course huge news. So there is some flux, there is some opportunity perhaps for Oklahoma to show out, but I think that there are some other programs in the SEC that I would find a little bit more likely to kind of either jump Oklahoma or stay in front of Oklahoma. I don't necessarily see a whole lot of room for that program to move up in the conference rankings and then subsequently in the playoff ranking as well. And speaking of Alabama, I mean, without Nick Saban, Kalen DeBoer, the head coach from Washington, is now the head coach there. In a move that I found it to be kind of an interesting move because Alabama is absolutely one of these crazy programs where if you lose a single day, a single game, people aren't happy. If you
They're
lose
freaking
two,
out.
they are outright calling for your job. Like it's a program where even if you are at the very top of the college football landscape, why would you want to go there with that kind of pressure? Obviously, for Kalen DeBoer coming off of Washington, a program that kind of sort of came out of nowhere last year to
Because of
be
him
in the
in
college
part.
football playoff, in part because of him. I also highly suspect, in part because he was loaded with NFL talent, Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, and then Javon Baker. No,
Michael
Javon
Penix
Baker was
Jr.
elsewhere, but Penix Jr. Like you had just like so much talent. You were in a conference in the Pac-12 that was actually like pretty strong last year. And I suspect if you talk to some people, and we'll get to this program later as well, Oregon probably outplayed Washington for the majority of both games, but Washington just came up with the big play at the right time to actually win those games, to win the Pac-12, to go to the college football playoff. So I kind of feel like this is, Kellen DeBoer reaching like the Peter principle, the absolute pinnacle of where he is going to be as a coach. As far as a top five program,
Mm.
Alabama literally finished at the end of the season with the rankings as the fifth program in the nation. That was with Nick Saban as the head coach. So they've been, by definition, a borderline top five team. They've just been on the other side of that borderline. I think this might be the year that they kind of tumble down a little bit.
Mm.
Absolutely, it's a talented program, but as we've seen, Georgia has now been the big bully with Texas coming in. Even with Oklahoma, I know Oklahoma, I feel is a bit more diminished of an SEC ad, but there's just so much in the SEC. I feel like Alabama's a team that's probably going to slip down the board a little bit as far as the top five rankings go. Um, that's just my opinion. I mean,
Sure.
obviously they have the talent, and Kalen DeBoer could absolutely continue to show out and continue to impress. But if I'm flipping a coin and saying, "Hey, you guys were on the edge of top five in or out last year," I'm leaning a little bit more toward out. I don't think they would have finished fifth if they hadn't beat Georgia last year. So I think that's kind of where I'm leaning.
So obviously it's kind of hard to, progress, look into the future because we don't know what recruits they're going to get. We don't know for sure how everyone's going to respond to DeBoer. But
Hmm.
my gut feeling is that they are going to stay as a top five program.
Hmm.
I mean, I look at this guy. I think it's a terrific hire for them. He's won, he's 104-12 in his career as a head coach. I know he went to, the NAIA where he won 3 national titles, a proven winner. But he just led Washington to the CFP, a program that you just said came out of nowhere. I mean, like, it'll be impossible to do what they did with Nick Saban. They won 6 national titles at Alabama in his tenure, 7 of
Hmm.
the last 9 years in the CFP, 6 of the last 9 years they played in the national championship game, having won 3 of those national titles. So they were the best program in the country with Nick Saban. Look at the last, 2, 3 years, probably number 2 behind Georgia, but they were still beating Georgia. And I look at last year's Alabama team. First off, I really like Jalen Milroe. I'm not saying he's not a really good player, but comparatively speaking, the Jalen Hurts, Tua, even at the college level, Mac Jones with the targets he had, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, these are NFL receivers. I think they were just, anytime you lose a big recruiting class, you lose a couple big level players. They were kind of in a rebuild year last year for their program because, they just lost Bryce Young. I think they're going to get a lot more really, really good players. I think that's a team that, for me, should be. They're not going to win 6 national titles in 17 years like they did with Nick Saban. But you mentioned DeBoer being at the pinnacle, at the peak of his career. I think the best is yet to come. I mean, I think Alabama, the program, again, I don't think he's going to get 6 national titles. I think it's never happened. It just doesn't happen, period. But I think he can win a national title at Bama. I don't know if it's 1, I don't know if it's 2, but I think he can win a national championship there. I think the program is just so big when it comes to college football. They've been so relevant. I mean, think about it. If you're a young kid having played football in the last, 15, 20 years, you've grown up seeing Bama win, win, win. It's all they do. So I think he's going to find the right players. I think he's a guy that if you watched, Washington, that's a very well-coached team. They definitely, I think, overachieved. I think Oregon was a better team than them. I think you put it right. Oregon should have beat them, but they won because of their coach. So I think Georgia's kind of taken over as the top program right now. I could argue Ohio State maybe is number 2. I know they've kind of folded in the clutch moments, but Ohio State has been there for a while now. But I think it's hard for me to maybe it's because all I know. I mean, maybe when I was very, very young, I did see Bama as a non-top 5 school, but pretty much, as I went into high school, went into college, most of my life, really watching the game as a fan, as a sportscaster, I've seen Bama be top 5. And I mean, this guy, based on what he did last year with Washington, you could argue that he was the best coach in college football last year. I mean, I would say Kirby Smart for me is top dog, but this guy is, I would say, a top 5 coach in the country. And Alabama's going to get top 5 talent. Alabama's going to win. So I think, to me, they're still going to be a top 5 program. I look for them to be a top 5 program this year. I don't think they're going to win the championship, but they're a force to be reckoned with. I think for me, they'll take a mini step back, but as far as the landscape of college football, for the most part, I don't think Bama's not going to be one of the top programs in college football, for me at least.
It's certainly they're going to have to earn their way in because it's definitely a lot of talent all around them, and it's going to come down to kind of sort of how their schedule plays out as well. I mean, looking at it, they definitely are facing Georgia, so that's going to be a tough test for them. That's definitely, and that's kind of like early on in the season as well. So that's one of those things where it's like, would you maybe rather play Georgia a little bit later when you're gelling a little bit more? I think the timing could absolutely be huge for them on that. And I don't know. Maybe I'll save this little bit of a tidbit for later in the show, but I think that the Alabama Crimson Tide are going to have at least 2 losses heading into the postseason discussion, which, I mean, 2 losses can still definitely get you into the playoff. It's not going to get you into the top 5, though. Let's move over to the Big Ten. We've been talking a lot of SEC so far. Probably the big headliner, Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks. A school that had a lot of good talent, but also lost a lot of talent. Bo Nix is in the NFL. Bucky Irving is in the NFL. Troy Franklin is in the NFL. Austin Powers Jackson, probably your best interior offensive lineman, is in the NFL. So there's a lot to replace, but there's something that Oregon has been able to do well, I think. It's build their program through the trenches, and that's something that's going to play in pretty much any conference. Of course, we've got a couple other former Pac-12 schools. We've got USC, UCLA, and I'm blanking on one. Is Washington also going to the Big Ten on this one? So that's a lot of programs going in, but I think probably the 2 biggest headliners, USC, Lincoln Riley, Dan Lanning at Oregon, are probably the 2 biggest ones. So how do you think they're going to shake up and stand out in this conference, Kamen?
Yeah, I mean, I think Oregon right now, you look at Oregon for this upcoming season, they're ranked 3rd in the nation. Ohio State is ranked 2nd, so they're considered the second best team going in. Obviously, they're getting the talented quarterback out of Oklahoma, Dylan Gabriel. He's the Heisman favorite. I actually have, in my opinion, Tom, I think the Big Ten doesn't have the same depth of the SEC. I think you look at
Not
the
anymore,
SEC.
yeah.
I mean, even before, I think SEC generally, for me, has more top 25 teams So I think that Oregon and USC are going to thrive in the Big Ten. I would say their odds of being Big Ten powerhouses are even a little bit higher than Texas and Oklahoma, just because, Penn State has been good, but I think they've been that team that has kind of like, they're a classic team of they beat everybody they should beat, but they're not necessarily getting, any crazy upset wins. I think Ohio State and Michigan are the top dogs. They're two awesome programs. But Oregon and USC should for sure be 3 and 4, where like Texas and Oklahoma, maybe there's a whole hodgepodge of teams in the SEC that any given year could, pull out there and be really, really big. But I think Oregon's a terrific football program. They've been really, really good for the last 10 years. They should definitely be, I think their preseason ranking at number 3 is probably pretty fair for who they are as a program. I mean, look at just their quarterbacks recently. Justin Herbert, Bo Nix, NFL guys. You look at even Bo Nix, like what he did at Auburn, he was just okay. But at Oregon,
Hmm.
he was so much better. I think it's the system they have, the way they develop their players. I think it's a terrific college football program. And I think they're going to be really, really good. I think it's probably going to be Oregon 3. I think this year they might be ahead of Michigan. Obviously, Michigan, losing their coach, losing their quarterback, losing their running back. They've lost a lot from the national championship team. But Michigan's going to
Hmm.
regroup and reload. I would probably put the hierarchy like 1 Ohio State, 1A Michigan, and 1B Oregon. And I like Lincoln Riley a lot as a football coach. I think USC is going to be the 4th program. I know they're ranked 23rd overall right now. Like Penn State is ranked ahead of them. But if you're going to ask me like long term, who am I trusting more, Penn State, or am I trusting,
Hmm.
USC? I think USC is going to be a better program. So rankings are probably fair for where they are. Obviously, USC losing Caleb Williams, 23 is probably a pretty fair spot for them. I know their defense is going to have to take a huge uptick in the Big Ten. That's the one question mark with USC. Can they play defense? They certainly didn't play any
Hmm.
defense last year. But I think it's also like when you have such a glaring weakness, I think it makes it a little bit easier in recruiting. Like, because USC has had really good defensive players in the past. I mean, Troy Polamalu comes to mind, of course. It's not like a program that's always been bad at defense, which is the same thing I would say for Oklahoma. I know they've been a little bit worse on, defense lately, but those are two programs that have proven they can have big level players on both sides. So I expect Oregon to thrive in the Big Ten. They're probably my number 3, but in a given year, they can win the conference. And Lincoln Riley, I think, is a great football coach at USC. He's a great recruiter. Obviously, got Caleb Williams to come with him from Oklahoma. I think both of these teams are going to be just fine in the Big Ten. I think they're massive additions for the Big Ten because it's
Hmm.
kind of like you look at the Big Ten in recent years, it's like Ohio State, it's Michigan, and then it's like those are your only real national title contenders, whereas the SEC has Georgia and Bama every year, but there's usually a third team out of the SEC that is competing. So I think it's a massive step for the Big Ten. I still think they're the second conference for me, Tom, but I
Yeah.
think it puts them, as far as the top teams, puts them in a little bit better spot to go up against the SEC because they got the 2 best teams out of the Pac-12. I mean, that's the top 2 teams. They
Hmm.
took what was, I know Washington, last year was an anomaly, but we don't expect Washington to be consistently, the second or best program out of the Pac-12. They took the Pac-12, which was what, the 3rd or 4th best conference, and they took their 2 best teams, which is what
Hmm.
SEC did from the Big 12. So, I mean, we're
Yep.
setting up for an SEC and a Big 10, collision for the top 2 conferences. I expect Oregon and USC to be just fine in that Big 10 conference. That explosive offense, we talk about their defenses have to adjust. I think some of these Big 10 defenses will have to adjust to the offenses, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think this is a bad year to try to pick Iowa to be a program that's going to be doing much of anything as far as trying to rise up those top 25 rankings because I think right now they're sitting at 25 and a lot of people thought that Torrey Taylor, their punter, was maybe their best player last season.
Chicago Bear, baby.
It's definitely going to be a program that's going to have to change its ways. But yeah, I think that Oregon is a team that slots in perfectly. I agree with them being right there at the top with Ohio State in that conversation. I think that Michigan as far as being a top team. They're there because they won the title last year, but they lost so much, like you mentioned, from their program going into this year. I kind of feel like they're going to have perhaps a similar sort of trajectory that Notre Dame has had, where you had not Chip Kelly, Jim Kelly was the head coach for Notre Dame. He goes to LSU. You promote within, Freeman becomes the head coach, but there's a little bit of a step back for Notre Dame. I think Michigan's going to go through something similar with their program, where currently they're sitting, what, ninth in the country? That's fourth in the Big Ten. Um, I think that, yeah, like Oregon fits right up there. USC, they got to prove it, in my opinion. I mean, Lincoln Riley has shown that he can put together a really nice offense, really high-powered offense with these, a little bit diminutive quarterbacks, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Caleb Williams. This is going to be a little bit different. You're not playing, in the kind of like south middle of the country as far as like Big 12 games go, and you're certainly not out on the West Coast. You're going to be playing some pretty challenging football throughout the season, where you're going to have to make some foul weather trips. And we saw that the defense just could not be trusted for USC last year. In spite of Caleb Williams being a really good quarterback, we saw him kind of press sometimes. I mean, he had how many fumbles because not a great offensive line. It's kind of the antithesis of what Oregon has been able to do for building up a program. So we're looking at some games. We're looking at some teams I think longer term are going to prove out to be pretty good additions. But I think as far as this year goes, Oregon's probably the only new Big Ten team that I'm going to say is going to be making the playoff, as opposed to USC for this conference.
Yeah, I mean, I think USC for me right now, having lost Caleb Williams, and just obviously it's really hard to project how much of these rankings are right, because there's usually a team that's in the top 25 that isn't there. And now we always talk about, we look at the recruiting number, like this guy is ranked X recruit, blah blah blah.
Mhm.
But those guys don't always pan out. But just given what they lost and given where they are and given where they were last year, because USC was not great last year, even with Caleb Williams, I think it's fair to say they're not going to be a college football playoff contender this year.
Mhm.
But I think it's also, for me personally, I don't see why they can't be one going forward, though.
Sure.
So that's a program to watch. Maybe it's 2 or 3 years. Maybe it's not right off the bat. But I mean, would you say USC is probably in that 3-4 range when it comes to the Big Ten hierarchy? I would say Ohio State, Michigan, and then probably Oregon and USC, right?
Yeah, I'd probably say they're toward the tail end of that to be certain. Because I would say, let's
I mean,
see.
Penn
Yeah, like,
State is the only other program that has been
mhm.
consistently ranked that high. I know Iowa and
And that's
Wisconsin have random years where they're right there, but they're not consistently, like a top program, which we've
yeah, I
seen from
think
Oregon and USC.
yeah, I would say for now I'd keep the Nittany Lions above USC to kind of like round out that top four or so. But like, yeah, USC, I mean, certainly jumps the line on some programs that aren't quite as alluring, shall we say. I mean, especially when you look at schedule. I mean, Penn State's going to have Ohio State this year, and they're going to actually face off against USC, so that's going to be a good one. But looking at the rest of their schedule,
Well,
Penn
where's that
State
game
doesn't
at?
have that is, I believe that is in California. Yeah, it's at
Yeah, so that
USC, and then they're
that'll be a
home
toss
against
up.
Ohio State. So that's one where that's probably going to determine who's above who, especially for me. Uh, Looking at the Nittany Lions, those are the only two ranked games that they're currently playing. So for this
Sure.
particular year, they also have a bit of a softer schedule. USC definitely gets welcomed in with a little bit of a tougher run as they're facing, like we already said, they're got Michigan, Penn State. They're getting Notre Dame at the end of the year. They're starting off with LSU. So this just might be like a little bit of a rough start, or this is a pretty good opportunity that if USC wants to prove the doubters wrong, they have a lot of opportunities for steel to sharpen steel here as the season goes on.
Sure.
So I think another area where players are going to have to prove themselves is the Heisman race. This is something where Jaden Daniels last year kind of came a little bit out of nowhere to win it. I know he had a good year prior at LSU, but certainly made a big jump. Last year, I think we were talking about Caleb Williams was like the odds-on favorite because
To
he's the
repeat.
best quarterback in the country. Certainly had a bit of a disappointing statistical year. Certainly USC as a
He still had to
program
put up crazy numbers, but for
put up
his
crazy
standards,
numbers, but yeah, by his standard, he fell out of that Heisman ranking or that Heisman
more so
race.
because of their defense couldn't win games than him
They certainly
personally.
it's hard to win football games when your defense is giving up 40 points on a weekly basis, it feels like. But this kind of feels like a pretty wide open year. I mean, in years past we've had Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, where it's okay, we've got a couple of top quarterbacks heading into the draft. It was a similar thing with Caleb Williams this past year. This is a year where quarterback is a little bit of a soft spot heading into the draft, which means that there's a lot of opportunity for different quarterbacks who are eyeing a leap to the professional league to prove themselves, but it also means that there's not necessarily a straight up and down odds on favorite or even two favorites. If you want to say, oh, Ohio State's quarterback versus Alabama's quarterback, like it was with Young and Stroud, this could very well be a year where a quarterback isn't who wins the Heisman race. I think it's going to be really, really difficult to prove out. Like, could it be Quinshon Judkins from
How
OSU
about
making
Luther
that move?
Borden?
Could be Luther Burden from
Mizzou,
Mizzou. Thank you. I don't know why my words aren't really
alma
working
mater,
correctly.
baby.
So, Common, in a year, are you going to go with? I believe he currently is the leader in pole position, Dylan Gabriel, based off of gambling odds, but certainly isn't an odds-on favorite. Certainly is going to be a plus money wager there if you're looking to put money down on a Heisman winner. But for you, looking at just kind of everything around players, programs, the shifting landscape. Who do you like as your Heisman winner this year?
Yeah, I think you kind of hinted at this. You kind of said it without actually saying it, and I'm just going to go ahead and actually say it. There's not, at least on paper, a truly like, and there might be some of that emerges. I mean, there's
Mhm.
obviously a lot of talented players, but there's not a truly like amazing Heisman favorite. There's not a truly like player you look at that you're like, that guy's the best player in college football. That guy's going to be the best player in the NFL. There's not a guy that you look at that really, really stands out. Dylan Gabriel is the favorite at plus 700. You look at Georgia quarterback Carson Beck is number 2 at plus 750. Quinn Ewers for Texas is plus 1,000. Jalen Milroe for Bama plus 1,000. Jackson Dart for Ole Miss at plus 1,200. Ohio State quarterback, the Kansas State transfer Will Howard is also on there as well, plus 1,200. But only 4 non-QBs, by the way, Tom, have
Mhm.
won the Heisman Trophy since the start of the 21st century. So I'm going to give you a few guys real quick before I make my pick that aren't necessarily quarterbacks. I think, I'm going to go biased, but I don't even think it's biased. Luther Burden out of Mizzou, the wide receiver. Some are saying he might be a top 10 pick next year. You
Mhm.
look at, last year, the first half of last year, or even like the first 2/3 of the season, he was right up there with Malik Neighbors for the best numbers of any wide receiver in college football. The back half of last year, Mizzou really went to running the ball a lot more. Well, their top 2 running backs are both, graduated. They're done playing at Mizzou. They use Luther Burden a lot in a lot of those like run plays as well. I think he's going to get a
Mhm.
lot more looks receiving, a lot more looks running the ball. Mizzou has a very favorable schedule. I think they have, Alabama and Oklahoma are their only 2 games that I believe they're underdogs this year. And I think they certainly have a real chance against Oklahoma in that game. So I think Luther Burden will put up massive numbers. He'll be a legitimate Heisman contender. He's got the second best odds of a non-quarterback. The first is Travis Hunter out of Colorado, the two-way receiver cornerback. But I think Colorado's just not going to win enough games for him to really be considered. I think they'll get better this year. But you got to have like historic numbers to win the Heisman if your
Be
team is
be
losing
careful,
5 to 6
De
games.
Deion Sanders is going to ban you.
Yeah, he might. He might.
He's gonna you're not going to be able to ask him any questions for
Sorry,
for
Prime.
for speaking such blasphemy
He'll
against
give you
prime
the Kim English
time.
treatment to you.
Oh,
I'll be
yeah.
careful. I'll be careful. So Luther Burden is my like long shot. I'm gonna go and pick I've gone back and forth. I have it down to
Mm,
three guys. It's the three favorites. It's really, really boring. I think Dylan Gabriel out of Oklahoma, Oklahoma quarterback now going to Oregon is going to put up massive numbers in that system. He's a
hmm
terrific, terrific, passing quarterback, a talented lefty. He's very crafty. He it's between him, Carson Beck, and Quinn Ewers. Now Georgia's schedule was really, really interesting. They have the toughest schedule in college football. I had it written down here. I believe they're playing Texas. They're playing Alabama. Their schedule was absolutely brutal. Let me actually pull it up real quick here. I had it written
hmm
down, but maybe it escaped me. But they've got the toughest schedule. So obviously, if they can run the table, he's a shoe-in for the Heisman. But I think, look at Georgia football and what they do. They have a really, really good defense. They have traditionally really, really good running backs as well. It's not all reliant on the quarterback. I mean, Stetson Bennett didn't win the Heisman Trophy, and they won back-to-back national titles. So I'm going to lean Dylan Gabriel over Carson Beck. I think Quinn Ewers is a really, really interesting possibility. Obviously, he's coming off an incredible season last year. He took his team to the CFP. I think he's a really, really good quarterback. I know they did lose a couple of receivers, though, so it'll be interesting to see. I
hmm
believe Texas lost their top two receivers and their running back from last year. So I'm going to lean Dylan Gabriel. I think Oregon is the most, pass heavy team of those teams. They're the, most reliant on passing. And they make it easy for the quarterback. They have a lot of screen passes that go for 40, 50-yard plays. They have a lot of, design plays that, how did Bo Nix have like a 70% completion percentage? Like he was a great quarterback, but like he had some deep throws, but he wasn't necessarily chucking the ball 40, 50 yards in the air. It was like a
hmm
5-yard slant going for 50 yards. I don't know if it's the system, the athletes. I know they are losing one of their top receivers, but I'm going to lean Dylan Gabriel at Oregon. It's kind of a cop-out pick. He's the favorite, but I think it's not going to be like it's going to be a wide open competition going down to the last game of the season. The other outside interesting one is Will Howard out of Ohio State. He
hmm
transferring out of K-State. Ohio State's got like 4 All-Americans this year. I know they're losing Marvin Harrison Jr., but like a lot of their other guys are back. The talent on Ohio State is through the roof. You want to go long shot of Ohio State, if not the quarterback, Travion Henderson, the running back. He's a super athletic guy, very, very good player. Travion Henderson is a guy to keep an eye on. But I'll go Dylan Gabriel just because of the system at Oregon. I think it'll be well set up for him to put up the biggest numbers compared to the other top quarterbacks. And, Oregon's ranked 3rd in the country. They'll probably lose a game somewhere, but if they lose like 1 game, 2 games, I think he's, a pretty good spot for the Heisman win. And we saw LSU. Like you can't lose 4, 5, 6 games.
hmm
But if you lose like 2 or 3 and you have the bust numbers, you will win. That's the issue with Travis
Yeah.
Hunter and Shedeur Sanders at Colorado, the quarterback. They'll probably lose 5. I think of it like if you lose 5 or more games, you're not going to win the Heisman Trophy. I think if you lose, 3, 4, 1, or 2, and you have the best numbers, you'll win the Heisman Trophy. I don't see Oregon losing more than 3 or 4 games. That's for sure. So give me
Yeah.
Dylan Gabriel as my Heisman winner.
Nice. Well, I mean, I think that in a year where the Heisman race is up for grabs, I'll throw a dart and choose Jackson Dart from Ole Miss as my pick to win
Pun
the
intended.
Heisman. He's got a fairly soft schedule, which means that there is a lot of opportunity
But he's losing
for
to
Ole Miss.
Mizzou.
Probably, possibly. We'll see. I mean, they're ranked what, 6th in the nation as of right now, so they have plenty of steam behind them already as being a really, really good program. I mean, he's returning a bunch of senior receivers, so there's going to be a lot of flow to the offense. Quinshon Judkins transferring out means that focal point doesn't necessarily have to be the running game. And I would say after Kirby Smart, Lane Kiffin might be the best coach in the SEC. I mean, he was the
He's
one
good
coach that
for
was pretty
offense.
consistently giving Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide problems. Even
I
with,
like DeBoer, but I agree about Lane Kiffin. He's
I mean,
probably
that's
right
I
up
say
there.
debatable. Yeah, I'd
Yeah.
say that's he's
And he's
debatably
he's an
behind.
offensive coach too, which helps the quarterback.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, the running Rebels look like they're probably going to be a playoff team this year. Like I said, they're going to be able to run up a pretty good record, and they're avoiding Georgia, which is pretty key as well. So you've got some good opportunities for some signature wins against LSU and Oklahoma. We'll see how strong those two programs stay in order for Ole Miss to, like I said, have the steam behind them for those Heisman moments, quote unquote. But I mean, Dart had a 23-5 touchdown and interception rate last season. I think that can definitely improve as he has another year of experience. And like I said, he's got three senior receivers starting with Wells, Harrison, Watkins. I think there's a lot of opportunity here for Jackson Dart to be somebody who is going to be moving up draft boards, perhaps when it comes time for NFL scouts to be looking at college quarterbacks. But certainly before that, and a big part of that evaluation process is going to be the Heisman race. So, like I said, this could be a year for a non-quarterback, but I think that there's enough opportunity, and this typically is a quarterback award anyway, unless you're Devontae Smith catching 23 bajillion touchdown passes in a season type of thing.
Sure.
I think this is a year where we might get a little bit of a surprise. I mean, of course, I mean the guys that you mentioned are the front runners are front runners for a reason. But I think Ole Miss may be getting slighted a little bit here, and that there's a really, really good opportunity for a bit of an upset pick, in my opinion.
Cool. Can't wait to see who's going to get the Heisman. There's probably a guy we didn't even mention that's going to get it, Tom. That's how it works.
Possibly, yeah. Like who else can make that Joe Burrow jump, that Jaden Daniels jump? I mean, there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of guys, especially with, I mean, we've talked about the conferences shifting around. I mean, we're still pretty early on in the this era of you don't have to sit out a year to transfer. So the transfer portal being as wide open as it is, as fluid as it has become. I mean, you've got a guy in Kyle McCord who's now starting at Syracuse. I mean, he could have continued with some continuity at OSU, but decided that's not something that was his bag. So there's just like, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of different guys to prove themselves. And certainly a lot of opportunity for programs to prove themselves as now the college football has a full-on playoff system. So if you win a bowl, congratulations. That's only good if you win a couple more and are hosting a championship title. The bowl game itself doesn't really matter anymore, but that's okay. So we've got a new playoff system here. We've got the four, you kind of like big conference winners. We've got a group of five representative as well, and then we have an at-large field. If I'm understanding the college football structure correctly, so Kamen, uh, how do you want to do this? Should we kind of start with just going by conference because that's going to determine the
Give your
first
five
five
winners.
seeds? Yeah, exactly. So who you have going in
Yeah,
as the
we could
top
do it that
five?
way. Yeah, I mean, I like Georgia to win the SEC. I think Georgia, I mean, they are the top team in college
Hmm.
football. We can open up this can of worms if we want. I don't want to keep this like a big discussion, but in my opinion, they would have won the national championship last year had they gotten put in the playoff. You saw them murder
Yeah.
Florida State. I know FSU had guys out. Well, so did Georgia.
Hmm.
I think it was the classic of, if you basically win every game or lose one game in 2 years, you're going to have a slip somewhere. Alabama obviously is a terrific program, and Nick Saban seemed to have Georgia's number. They just happened to pick a bad game to have their worst game of the season
Hmm.
against Alabama in the SEC title game. I think they should have made the playoff anyway, but obviously that's not what the committee chose. So I think Georgia's the top team. Carson Beck actually looked pretty good last year as the quarterback.
Hmm.
He's coming back. Kirby Smart he always gets the top recruits. I know we always talk about, like, I mentioned it earlier in the show, you never know which recruit's going to hit, but it seems like Georgia's recruits hit pretty much all the time. So Georgia's going to be my SEC champion. I'm going to go Ohio State in the Big Ten. They've been really, really close. I think they get over the hump this year. They've got four All-Americans. That is the most in the country. They have, a great running back in Trayvon Henderson. I know Marvin Harrison Jr. is out, but their number two receiver is back. A lot of their defense is back. They're a well-coached
Hmm.
team. I think Ohio State will take home the Big Ten. I think ACC, I've read a little bit, hearing a few things. I'm going to go a mini upset. I'm going to go with Miami. I think Miami makes a comeback. They have a very talented team. Miami Hurricanes come back. I think that this whole NIL era has really been dangerous for Dabo Sweeney, and seems like Clemson, I know they're ranked pretty high, but it seems like they've kind of really taken a step back because they haven't really embraced the transfer portal. I know Florida
Hmm.
State's in the mix, but they're currently, I actually have it pulled up on my phone here. They're
Week
21
zero.
21 with 111 to go. And Georgia Tech's got a 1st and 10 on, inside the 20. So Georgia Tech might even pull an upset here in Ireland. So it's one game. Obviously, doesn't decide everything.
Hmm.
But I'm going to lean Miami getting that ACC crown. That'll be my pick out of there. As far as other conferences, gosh, who's going to get the Big 12? That's
I know, right?
The Big 12 is kind of a mess. That conference has really, really gone down. I think I'm going to go Oklahoma State. I think, with Texas and Oklahoma gone, Oklahoma State has been a really, really strong program in recent memory. So I'll go the Oak State Cowboys. Mike Gundy, uh, he is quite the personality, but he's been there so long. They are actually, looks like, the highest ranked team out of the Big 12, and they're ranked 17th. So K-State is ranked 18th, but they just lost their
Hmm.
quarterback. So I'm going to go with Oklahoma State. They have the most continuity, the most stability there. That'll be my Big 12 champ. And what are we missing? Am I missing one?
I think is it like there's a designated group of five representative that would be making it in before we get to the at-large bids, I think.
I think it says the 5 conference champions. I don't think there's a designated group of 5. Let me look
Which
it
one
up
are we
real
missing?
quick.
Because yeah, because Pac-12 is no more. I'll go ahead and give mine up to this point. I
Sure.
mean, I completely agree with Ohio State as the coming out of the Big Ten. This is a program that's definitely going to be on a mission for years. For years, it was the bane of Jim Harbaugh's existence as the coach at Michigan, where he was just trying to get his alma mater to beat OSU. For years, the Buckeyes had the drop on Michigan. Past couple of years, that has changed with Michigan getting a couple of pretty significant wins over the past couple of years, and also a national championship to go along with it. Ohio State is a program on a mission. Ryan Day is probably an underrated coach, in my opinion, from the standpoint of he consistently has the Buckeyes with one loss every season, maybe two. And yet people keep screaming for his job. I don't necessarily know who you're going to find that's a better coach than
It's
Ryan
going to be the
Day,
same case as
particularly
Harbaugh.
now.
Harbaugh was
Yeah.
eventually going to, he was on the hot seat, and then he ended up winning
Hmm.
a championship. I'm not saying it's going to happen this year, but I think eventually Ryan Day will win a championship at Ohio State, and that hot
Yeah.
seat is going to cool off a lot more.
Yeah. So I've got Ohio State. I've got the Buckeyes winning the Big Ten. I think it's going to definitely be a pretty close battle. But I think that this is a year where, like I said, Michigan is going to be a bit diminished, in my opinion. So even that big matchup in rivalry week is going to be one that I would give an edge toward the Buckeyes. Georgia coming out of the SEC, I think that's where I'm going to lean for now. But in an era where college football has more parity than ever and Georgia has a pretty tough schedule, I don't know if they're necessarily going to be that much better that they steamroll over everybody to win this conference. But I will go with the Bulldogs. I will lean with the program that, save for one game over the past couple of years, has proven that they are pretty much better than everybody else, and by a decent margin, unless you're the Missouri Tigers. Then it's going to be a close game. Out of the ACC, to be completely honest, I did have FSU written down for my team on that one. I'm looking at what the score is now. Um, yeah, it's still Georgia Tech's got the ball. This is possibly going to go to overtime. So while this definitely wouldn't completely end Florida State's season, it certainly wouldn't be a great look to have an unranked team beating you even on a neutral site across the pond in Ireland. So I'll stick with Florida State for now. We'll see if they're able to pull it out. But I think, like you mentioned, Miami is definitely a solid choice, and even Clemson, I would also consider for the ACC as well. But this is definitely a conference that has not been a particularly strong one over the past couple of years. With Jordan Travis heading to the NFL, you've got a little bit of flexibility or influx at the quarterback position. Um, Still a pretty strong program throughout. I mean, they were able to soldier on with a second and third string quarterback. So we'll see how the Seminoles are able to kind of pick up the pieces and perhaps look a good bit sharper when they don't necessarily have however much jet lag playing in a neutral site across several time zones away. And then
Just to
I'll actually go counter. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just to clarify real quick, this is how I thought it was. I didn't want to misspeak. There is a
Mhm.
group of 5 team. I was just looking it up on my phone. I'm going to go with Boise State as mine, by the way,
Mm.
because of their awesome field. They're almost ranked in the
Yes.
top 25. I know Liberty is a very hot pick. They got a soft schedule, but
Hmm.
Boise State is well coached, a great tradition. I'm going to go Boise State as that 5th team, but go ahead, Tom.
Well, and Boise State, I mean, they're going to be my pick as
But by the
well
way, real
for that
quick,
spot.
Georgia Tech, I
Hmm.
believe, just fumbled the ball like 10, 15 yards backwards and is putting themselves in really, really tough field goal position. Even if they make the kick, Florida
Hmm.
State's kicker has already made a 58 and a 51-yard field goal in this game. So FSU could very well tie the game potentially on a field goal. But that's the update there now. Georgia
That's
Tech
a
might be
little
out of field goal range by fumbling backwards.
that's a little too close for comfort still for a team that I think could make the football playoff. But I
Yes.
mean, this could also be a case of, we see a couple, top 25, top 10 teams every year that gets, put there initially, and perhaps it's on, brand recognition. This could end up being a down year for Florida State. So could have an early strike against me on that one. But for Boise State, I'll come back to the Big 12 in a moment because you brought them up. Boise State has a chance. We'll see if they're able to catch Oregon napping in week 2. I don't think that it is very likely. I don't think that they're going to win. But if Boise State gets the quote unquote moral victory of keeping it relatively close against Oregon, I think early in the season is a good time to be facing a team like Oregon where they are kind of trying to get a lot of different parts figured out together. If you can look good against them early, there's really exactly no ranked teams left on Boise State's schedule. So this could be a program that, like you
Keep it
said, just
close. You
barely
can make
outside
it.
of the top 25, keep it in, got to win by a pretty good margin against the rest of your competition. You can't be affording to have, a really tight game against San Jose State or against Wyoming toward the end of the season. You can't risk, traveling out to Hawaii and having a close game out there as well. You have to be on point the rest of the way if you want to be getting that group of 5 bid for this college football playoff. And then in the Big 12, I'm going to go with Kansas State. I mean, they got Avery Johnson there. It's a program that kind of consistently is never they're never great, but they're always a big enough of a thorn in the side that they're going to be there for the big games. I'm going to give a slight edge to the Wildcats to come out of a diminished Big 12. Certainly a lot of wide open space for other programs in that conference, but I'm going to go Kansas State Wildcats on this one as the representative. So that's the 5 locks that we're going to have in the highest ranked teams in the conference or in the group of 5, the highest ranked team out of the group of 5 making it in. Certainly, there can be more than one group of 5 team, but
Liberty.
looking at my list of the rest of the teams that are going to be in, I think, I definitely don't think this is going to be every single one gets in. I think I'm kind of framing this as these are the most likely teams, but just looking at how much SEC I have in here, there's going to be a lot of 2-loss teams because the SEC is just so deep, so talented. So, Kamen, how do you want to do this? Do you want to do, we're just going to go through them all,
I'm just gonna go through them all, yeah. And by
go
the
through
way,
them all,
Florida
fire
State
away.
has just lost.
Oh,
Walk-off kick. Georgia Tech wins 24-21 in regulation.
well,
So
I should probably look at an emendation toward the ACC representative. I mean, it's
right.
not over for Florida State, but that certainly hurts. This can't be one that you give away if you're a program that's supposed to be winning your conference, being the highest ranked team in the conference. The door is now wide open for a dark horse, like you said, Miami or Clemson to be coming on through.
Right. So I'm just gonna run through my teams, Tom.
Hmm.
So I really like Alabama. Obviously, I think Alabama is still a really, really good program. They got a great new coach. Their quarterback is back in Jalen Milroe. Alabama is always there. I can't remember Alabama not being a top 12 ranked team like
Hmm.
ever. Like seriously, like I know they have been, but it seems like the last 15 years they've been a top 12 program. They might take a loss or two, they might take a half step back, but I would say Alabama is a top 12 program. That's as much of a shoe-in as you're going to get when it comes to college football. I'll put Texas in. I think Texas, obviously, they're ranked fourth. They were in the Final Four last year. Again, their quarterback Quinn Ewers is back. Lost a couple of receivers and a running back, but it's a great, great program. I'll put Texas in. That's two. I'm going to put Notre Dame in. I think Notre Dame
Hmm.
is going to be a program to look out for. They do have a tough schedule, but I mean, maybe it just got a little bit easier. Florida State losing today. Actually, they actually don't have that hard of a schedule. They play A&M, Florida State, and USC are the only three ranked teams they play. That's what I've written down. Not a tough schedule. So if they can win 2 out of 3 against A&M, Florida State, and USC and run the table, which they can do, even if they lose one other game, basically 2 losses in the 12-team format will get you in. Unless
Sure.
something crazy happens, you only lose 2 games, you'll get in. I think Notre Dame is going to get in. Big time program. So I'm going to pick Michigan. I know they're losing a lot from last year, but they're also defending national champs. Talk about
Hmm.
swagger, talk about confidence. They do have obviously a really, really good program. I'll put Michigan in. I have Miami, I mentioned, is my champ out of the ACC. I'm going to put Clemson in. I know Dabble with the NIL hasn't been great, but I think Clemson has a bounce back year again. That's a team that in the CFP era, in the post BCS era rather, has been really, really good. I know they've struggled the last couple of years. I think Clemson makes a rebound. They're going to get in. Then I'm going to pick LSU. LSU, I think, is going to find a way to sneak in. I know I'm picking a ton of SEC teams. I know they'll beat each other up,
That's
but
that's the best.
but
That's
if
the
you have
best conference.
if you have 2 or 3, losses, you'll find a way to get in. I'll pick LSU. Oregon, I didn't mention, is the obvious one. If Ohio State's the Big Ten champ, Oregon is the second team there out of the Big Ten. And then I originally had Florida State as the final 12. After this
Hmm.
loss, it does make me scratch my head. I do have Mizzou in. That's the alma mater. Love the Mizzou Tigers. Their schedule relative to the SEC is not that bad. Only play
Hmm.
Bama and I believe they play Oklahoma. So Mizzou's schedule looks fairly nice, sets up fairly nice for our Tigers to make a run. So look for Mizzou to do it big. And then I guess I got to pick one more now that we do have Florida State losing. Mizzou plays A&M ranked, Alabama ranked, Oklahoma ranked. That's it. They actually don't even play Ole Miss, who I mentioned. So I guess I'll slide Ole Miss in there. Ole Miss is a team that I was looking to just not pick somebody because of the SEC, but let's
Hmm.
slide Ole Miss in there. Let's get all these SEC teams in. Utah is an outside chance as well. Penn State out of the Big Ten is an outside chance. I know my one team that didn't make the top 25 was Boise State as my pick.
Hmm.
But it's going to be really, really interesting because you look at these teams, you know, there's not like such a mega star on any one of these teams. There's not like such a clear cut, like that team is the team to beat. I mean, I think Georgia's the one, but now that it's a 12-team playoff, there's going to be a wide open field. My gut feeling is that there's going to be a lot of SEC teams in just because of who the SEC is, the strength of schedule. These teams will beat each other up, but now you have more room for error. You can
Hmm.
get a 3-loss SEC team ranked in the final 12. That is very, very possible. And that's kind of what I'm thinking. I think there might be, whether it's LSU or Ole Miss, there will be a 3-loss SEC team that gets in the top 12.
Yeah,
So
I
real
think.
quick, let me go
Mhm.
through 12. So I have Ohio State, I have Georgia, I have Miami, Boise State. That's 4. Then 5, Oklahoma State out of the Big 12. Then my 7 other teams were Texas, Bama, Oregon, uh, Clemson, Mizzou, LSU, and Ole Miss. Yeah, I guess I
Hmm.
got a lot of SEC schools. That's my conference. I'll roll with the SEC. You can't go wrong with the SEC, Tom.
Yeah, I mean that's excuse me, that's going to be where a large contingent of mine are coming in as well. I'm not going to go in order of, the top to bottom.
I didn't
Um,
either.
so so for me, I mean, like you said, Oregon, Alabama, Texas, these are programs that are currently in the top five. I think they certainly will end up in the top 12 or the top seven after the top five teams get in. So I think that those teams are absolutely going to be in. I like, what Notre Dame has done as well. Ole Miss, I've already talked about Jackson Dart as a Heisman dark horse candidate there. So clearly I have them in. They're also sixth in the nation presently. Definitely some upward mobility there. We have a lot of really, really similar picks. Really quickly, you're amending FSU. I'll amend FSU. I'm going to go with Clemson out of the ACC.
Okay.
Their schedule, pretty soft. They're in a spot where they're facing Georgia to start the season. It's okay if you lose to Georgia in week one. It's not okay if you lose to Georgia Tech in week one. So I think that if Clemson can come out and, play pretty tough against Georgia, they have a pretty smooth sailing the rest of the way for themselves. I also like Missouri to make it into the playoff. And then I'm going to go with a second Big 12 representative. Give me Utah. I was kind of going back and forth a little bit on Utah. They kind of fit the same mold that Kansas State does, which is they're going to be a thorn in your side. And I think that neither Utah or Kansas State, they're not facing each other in the season. Both teams get a crack at Oklahoma State, so that could be something where, that could be a pretty strong team. Kansas is ranked as well. Arizona ranked for or in the Big 12 as well. So I think Utah has a couple of really good opportunities to put up some strong wins without necessarily being uh, outgunned or out firepowered essentially in this conference to start out. So I do like the Utah Utes building up a strong enough resume to be ranked highly enough to be in this playoff as well. So that brings us now to the team that we think is going to win it all. And I got to tell you, Kamen, I've been going back and forth on a couple of dark horse picks here.
Ooh, dark
Probably going
horse
with a little
team.
bit more heart than head. But Kamen, who do you have winning it all? I'm interested to see through some of these really, really strong programs who you like coming out. Are you going to go with like the odds-on favor with Georgia?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Not even
Uh,
allowing me to put anything else out into the ether.
I'm a chalk guy. I guess Ohio State and Oregon will eventually get over the hump. It's more of a feeling thing, but those two programs, they've kind of really struggled in a lot of the big games, a lot of the big scenarios. Texas hasn't won in a while. Again, I think Georgia's the best team in the country. They were the best team in the country last year. They had a really bad time losing the SEC game, championship game. Bad timing. Their schedule was brutal. That's the one thing against them. They have a really tough schedule. It's possible if they lose maybe 2 games, which they probably will lose one, but it's possible they don't get the number 1 overall seed going into the playoffs. But I like Georgia. I like what they have. That's my pick. I actually like a Georgia and a Texas final personally. I think Texas with Quinn Ewers coming back. The guy's got a lot to prove. Arch Manning is out there getting more, attention, and he's not even the starting quarterback. So my pick is an all SEC final now that Texas is in the SEC. Obviously, Oregon, Ohio State, you got to look out for somewhere deep inside, selfishly. Speaking of homer picks, come on, Mizzou. That's who I'll be cheering for. But Kirby Smart, especially now that Nick Saban is gone, he is the smartest coach in college football. He is the best coach in college football. And really, like, outside of Alabama, Georgia has how many losses the last 3 years? I mean, seemingly the only team that could beat him is Alabama. And I think
Mhm.
obviously Alabama's losing their head coach, the best coach in college football history. And Jalen Milroe, again, I like Jalen Milroe. I'm not saying that I don't like Jalen Milroe, but compared to, some of the other quarterbacks Bama has had, like a Jalen Hurts, a Tua, even a Bryce Young. Like those guys are better. And Bama does not have the same receivers they had like 4 or 5 years ago. So I just don't see who's going to beat Georgia in a tournament scenario. They're so well seasoned. They're such a great, great program. So I'm going to pick Georgia. I got Georgia and Texas in my championship game. Probably my outside team would be Ohio State with all those All-Americans. But one thing about Ohio State and Oregon that just, immediately, I know we see immediate success a lot, but Dylan Gabriel is the new quarterback at Oregon. Will Howard's the new quarterback at Ohio State. Is there an adjustment period versus you look at Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers, the quarterbacks of Georgia and Texas? These guys have been there. They've done that. They have the experience. So give me Georgia over Texas. I know it may not end up being Texas. It's so hard to forecast the seedings. But if the seedings go like kind of how I'm roughly guessing and just like a gut feeling, Georgia and Texas championship, but obviously they might meet a lot earlier. A lot of other things can happen. So you don't have to pick a championship game. But I don't know who your team is. Mine obviously is the Bulldogs.
Well, I'm gonna be foolish, Kamen, because
Okay.
I know from the logical standpoint, Georgia is the team to pick until proven otherwise, and
Yes.
they were 3 points and a bad decision away from very probably being a run or a back-to-back champion. They have lost a decent bit. I mean, Lad McConkey was their top wide receiver. He's in the NFL. Brock Bowers, top tight end, probably best offensive player. He's now in the NFL. And yeah, Georgia does a great job of reloading every single year. But I'm going to go against the grain on this one.
Oh, miss.
I'm going with a championship game that I would really like to see happen. It is also, like you said, an SEC matchup. Give me Ole Miss to win the title, and it's going to be heartbreak because it's going to be over the Missouri Tigers. I'm looking at two
Yes.
programs that have
Let's
plenty of
go.
continuity, plenty
I'll take that.
of talent all around. I mean, Brady Cook, a senior, he had a pretty decent year last season. Eli
Very
Drinkwitz,
good year.
he's done a really good job as Missouri's head coach of kind of
Mizzou's
taking a
got the whole
program that
receiving core back, Tom. Their receiving
entire
core is
receiving core
absolutely
back.
stacked.
It's phenomenal talent. It's good coaching. He's got the Tigers playing with a chip on their shoulder. I mean, we kind of saw my fear with the Missouri Tigers years and years and years ago, as I stated on our original show when we were on actual broadcast airwaves. My concern was that this is a good move for Missouri as far as a basketball program goes. So as far as football goes, I just don't see how Mizzou's going to have success. And they initially did with Gary Pinkel those first couple of years. I mean, they got to an SEC championship game against Auburn, but then kind of dipped off for a good bit. Missouri played a really good Georgia team really closely last season. I think
Mhm.
that, looking at Missouri's schedule, uh, they have a pretty soft schedule. I think this could be a
And
Missouri
early,
team that
especially momentum. You win those
exactly.
games early, you have that momentum.
And like they're on the road against Texas A&M. I think Missouri is better than Texas A&M. They're on the road against Alabama. I have my doubts about Alabama. I absolutely can see the Missouri
That's
Tigers
their only loss for me.
winning against the Alabama Crimson Tide. I definitely have them at home against Oklahoma. Dare I say, Missouri could be undefeated. They could be going
That'd
to
be
another
amazing.
SEC championship
That'd be
game this
amazing.
year.
I have just
I
the
absolutely can
I
see
have them
it.
as one loss, Tom. I actually have
Very possibly.
Mizzou. I think they're gonna be like ranked like sixth or seventh in the country, maybe
Hmm
higher. Higher. Georgia does play three top teams, so
hmm
I would
And
love to
then
see it. I
and
would
with
love to
Ole
see it.
Miss, I think Ole Miss probably in the regular season, loses to Georgia when they face off. The way that I'm kind of spinning that in my head is Ole Miss is going to be in the college football playoff, and once you're in a playoff scenario, anything can happen. I kind of look at this as like a free look for Lane Kiffin for the running Rebels to say, okay, if we're going to win the championship, most likely we're going to have to face Georgia at some point, whether it's the
Mhm.
championship game itself or on the way there. I mean, they could get lucky and Georgia, somebody else knocks Georgia out. I don't know. But they can get like a pretty good look at Georgia and say, okay, Lane Kiffin is a legitimate NFL head coach talent. Like he's done the job. He's done the job as an offensive coordinator at the NFL level. So he has at least like the NFL mind. He's pretty progressive as far as being a head football coach goes, and styling his offense. And if, well, I mean, this is all correlational. If Jackson Dart also plays well enough to be a Heisman worthy quarterback this season, wheels up for Ole Miss. So give me the Ole Miss running Rebels. It's going to be heartbreak over Mizzou. I'm doing this NCAA March Madness style. But when it comes time, if it actually is Mizzou and Ole Miss, and probably isn't going to be, but if it is, I'm 100% going to flip-flop because I'm going with alma mater. I'm going all
Sure.
heart over head if Missouri makes it to the title game. But these are two programs that I think are going to be really, really exciting to watch throughout the season. They have the continuity, they have the talent. I'm excited to see what they can do.
Yeah, real quick. So here's Georgia's schedule. They play Clemson
Hmm
14th. They play Bama 5th. That is at Alabama, I believe. Let me confirm that is correct. That is at Bama. They play at Texas. They play at Ole Miss. And then they play number 16 Tennessee. So they actually have 3 road games against preseason top 6 teams in the country
hmm
for Georgia. That's a tough schedule. That's if
Yeah.
Georgia can get out with 1 loss, they might get the first overall seed. Mizzou, by the
hmm
way, their ranked opponents 20th Texas A&M on the road, against number 5 Bama, home against number 16 Oklahoma.
hmm
Mizzou has a way easier schedule relative to where Georgia's playing. Ole
Yeah,
Miss's
and as
schedule,
very easy
Ole,
as well.
Ole Miss is not bad. They
Hmm
play at LSU, 13th. They host 16th Oklahoma. They do play Georgia, but they host that game as well. Number 1 Georgia. Real quick, Alabama schedule. Alabama, I'm looking at my phone here. Host Georgia. They play on the road at Tennessee, where they lost a couple years ago, of course. Then they host Mizzou. They play on the road against LSU, a top 25 program. So Bama's schedule is a little bit easier than Georgia, but still pretty hard. Ole Miss's and Mizzou's schedule of all those teams do look the most friendly, I
hmm
would say, of the SEC teams. But I don't know. In some ways, the Georgia schedule is going to really make them battle tested. That's what I like about their team. Like I said, Georgia might
hmm
not end up being the number 1 seed going in, just because if they have 2 losses, they definitely won't be. Even with 1
hmm
loss, we'll see. Like I can see Ohio State or Oregon, one of them maybe running the table in the Big Ten and getting that first overall seed. But in a tournament setting, I just think Georgia's going to be very hard to beat. But I hope you're right, because I like Lane Kiffin, and I sure
hmm
do love Mizzou, baby. Now go Tigers.
Yeah, and as we're bringing the show back after our summer vacation, we don't have a Locks of the Week trivia statement of the week necessary locked in. But like I kind of said off air before we started, with a show like this where we are talking big picture preseason stuff, there are plenty of statements in there. So I think that we have a pretty solid amount of off the wall things that can constitute what locking in for the week absolutely as well, locking in for the entire season. And then next week we do football or NFL football preview. We also have to schedule the fantasy football draft.
Yeah, we have
I
a
don't
lot
know
of
if we
stuff.
necessarily want to do.
You got to join the league too, Tom.
Oh,
It's
I'm
what
not automatically.
no, and I was
Oh,
meaning to send out a message. So I sent you a message. So the league had this weird thing where it like I don't know what data was set, but it's making me do an offline draft and import the teams, and I wasn't able to change it, so I had to remake the league. So make sure you join.
okay, will do.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Send that invite or let me know what I got to do to do
It's on
that.
there. I sent it to you on
Um,
Facebook.
Awesome. And then I don't, do we want to like try to do a show while the draft is also going on?
Oh, that would be fun. I don't know.
That could be fun.
We'll
There's going to be
cross
so
that
much going
bridge.
on. We'll
I feel like that
discuss that
might be a
off
little
air.
bit too hard because I think we'll have a lot more fun with the NFL. I think the NFL will probably do it traditional, pick our division winners and pick our wild card teams, pick our
Hmm
MVP, our Super Bowl, which I still I'm gonna pick out of the AFC. I still don't know who
Oh
I'm gonna pick
yeah.
out of the NFC. I have no idea, Tom. I have about five teams
Your
swirling in
second
my
favorite
head.
quarterback in the NFL.
What'd you say?
Your second favorite quarterback in the NFL.
I
Go
hope
for it.
so.
Do it.
Caleb Williams.
Do a worst to a true first.
Yeah,
But yeah,
right.
we will have plenty of NFL content next week as football season is already underway with week 0 at the college football level. Week 1 starting up next weekend for college football, and then the Thursday after Labor Day. Next weekend is Labor Day weekend, and after that, the NFL season starts in earnest.
Chiefs and
I got to tell,
Ravens.
I haven't done a single redraft draft for the upcoming season. I probably should get on that for a couple of leagues. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm pumped. I have my first draft tonight. I last year I was in one league
Hmm.
and I got suckered into doing like two work leagues. And then I have my other work league I got to
For you.
organize. So now I'm gonna have four leagues, and I like having just one team and keeping my guys who I'm cheering for from a fantasy perspective. But that's all right, Tom. The more the merrier, I guess.
Exactly.
But I do have my first official draft later today. So that is something to look forward to. But great to be back with the show. It was a
Hmm.
lot of fun. Obviously, I think college football, like you and I know this, to be completely honest, like college football is so hard to predict because these programs
Hmm.
change so much. I didn't do as much research as I usually do. I've been super busy as well. But, I used to be a guy when we did these college football playoff, college football previews. I would dig deep and see like all the recruiting classes. I would look at like, who's got the number one recruits, who's got the most returning starters.
Hmm.
And then you do that, and then like it doesn't end up working out. I know a couple of years ago I did that with Clemson, and they were an utter failure. It is really, really hard to predict because these are college kids, how they
Hmm.
respond, and the top high school recruits to the next level are very, very hard to predict. So my predictions this year, I was going a lot off coaches, a lot off returning quarterbacks, the leadership, the stability of the programs. I think the NFL one, we can have a little bit better idea of who's really going to come out because,
Hmm.
in my humble opinion, looking at the 12-team format, especially, and looking at like where a lot of these programs are, I feel like it's so wide open this year in college football. I feel like this is college basketball with this 12-team format, Tom. It's in like the best teams have like the hardest schedules. Like Georgia should be the best team. They've got the most brutal schedule of anybody in the country.
Hmm.
So it's going to be a lot of fun to see what happens with college football.
Absolutely.
Definitely looking forward to the NFL as well. I know we have different work schedules. It's not going to line up probably quite as good as it did in the past. Maybe we go a few weeks without a show, but we'll definitely try to have shows at least once or twice a month. Keep you guys entertained. And our full NFL preview will be next weekend. And that'll be a pretty thorough show. Will be a lot of fun. Thanks again, Tom, for a great show. Thanks to everyone who's watching and listening. You guys are great. And we'll see you next week.